Matthew, welcome back to the Jim Masters Show, my friend.
Hi, Jim. It's glad to be back with you. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. We had so much fanfare on the Andy Gibb book that you wrote, which was incredible. It was extraordinary and it was so beautifully written. You had told me then, you said, Jim, I think maybe I'll do something on Olivia Newton-John. I've had a lot of requests. People have asked, and there really hasn't been a specific definitive book in this way. And you did it, and you did it quick. You move
Well,
fast.
I think it was about probably 2 years from the time I really started, not the time I finished it. But late nights and weekends.
A lot of nights and weekends too, and let people know what else you do, because you have a whole other career besides being an author, a career that takes a lot of your time as well.
Yeah, my primary career is that I work at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. I work in by teaching history classes, and I'm kind of help ensure students get the required civics education, history, and American government. So, it's a pretty busy job.
It's a busy job, and especially right now, this time of the year, it still is for you. So thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join us to celebrate this iconic figure. I've always enjoyed and admired Olivia Newton-John, her breathtaking voice, her wonderful personality. But, she has been through a lot of things in her life, ups and downs over the years. And of course, we lost her way, way too early. But this book really was a labor of love for you in so many different ways, which I think is spectacular. There's the cover, folks. You're going to want to get it because this is literally just within these few days, hot off the presses. It is truly an in-depth biography that closely examines the superstar's multifaceted career, personal life, advocacy, and legacy as well. What was it about Olivia Newton-John that spurred your fascination, your curiosity, and your interest to want to pen this incredible book celebrating her life and legacy, Matthew?
Well, like a lot of people who grew up in the basically late 20th century, I was well aware of Olivia Newton-John growing up, of course, always, and knew her hits and knew the films and had bought albums here and albums there. I remember I had greatest hits albums and some of her 45 singles and later on compact discs and all that stuff. So I was always a fan of hers. And after she passed in 2022, I was looking for a biography of her to read, and I did find one that had been published in 2008 and published in England. It kind of had a different perspective. It didn't really focus as much on her music as I would have liked. And I thought, well, plus enough time's gone by that it's time for a fresh look. And then once I actually started researching it and not only looking at the things she had done outside of her musical career and her acting career, but also talking to, as I was conducting interviews for the book with people who knew her and people who worked with her, it really became obvious that she had this whole incredible legacy aside from her career. Her basically founding of the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Research and Wellness Center in Australia, and activity in behalf of wildlife and the environment. And she was an ally, a forward ally of the LGBTQ movement. I say it right, LGBTQ movement back in her day. And so basically, she was really on the forefront of a lot of important developments and causes outside just, I don't want to say just her music career because it's a tremendous career, but what I realized was there's a lot more to her legacy than just her career.
That's exactly right. And that's I think one of the things that you captured, my friend, so beautifully is the essence of this extraordinary personality and gifted talent and beautiful person inside and out. For our viewers, we welcome everybody. Olivia Newton-John, of course, one of the biggest and most iconic global pop stars in history, with an estimated record sales of over 100 million and starring roles in several films, including Grease and Xanadu. And of course, her hit Physical was ranked by Billboard as the most iconic popular single of the 1980s. Can you imagine that? Behind all of this glitz and glamour was the extremely strong and kind and resilient person with an unfailing positive attitude in the face of personal tragedies and several setbacks as well. And for decades, she bravely and publicly battled breast cancer while continuing her education and career and advocating for environmental issues and all the wonderful causes that Matthew just outlined for us. This biography is based on, and you, like I said, the exhaustive research that you did in the interviews that you conducted, Matthew, were extensive archival research, original interviews with many of her friends and her associates over the years as well, revealing truly the real person who was Olivia Newton-John. And you provided, which I think is fantastic, many never before shared insights into the star's life, including the humanitarianism and the personal struggles, and diving deeply into her many famous records and lesser known work too, which is something fantastic. And I have the book here, and again, it really is something very, very special. Couldn't put it down. I recommend everybody do get it, but it really is something. You'll learn something about Olivia Newton-John, a few things that you might not have even known. And I think you'll appreciate her even more. Even if you already love her, you'll appreciate her so much more. So the idea of wanting to do this, which again, we're so happy that you did, because there really hasn't been anything written in the way that you wrote this. The inspiration and to do a full scale biography of Olivia Newton-John. What was that like doing that?
Well, like I said, there had been one done before, but it was almost 20 years ago. And with all due respect to that book, it was a good book, but the author really didn't interview many people that I did. And that was kind of the point. I really wanted to find people. I didn't really have a lot of luck reaching celebrities who knew her, a couple of exceptions, but overall, I wasn't really interviewing celebrities who worked with her, which in a way was not a problem because a lot of those celebrities who had worked with her already had said a lot about her over the years. What I was really trying to do was to reach out to the many people she worked with who weren't necessarily household names, but they worked with her closely in many cases for years, and spent time with her in her home and spent time with her on tour. And so these people knew her well and certainly had a lot of stories and insights to share. There's one right there in photograph. Skip Paris was a member of her touring band from 1975 through end of 78, beginning of 79, for about 4 years, toured with her, and I talked to him for, it must be like an hour and a half, and it could have gone twice as long as that. And he had all kinds of insights now, and kind of tough in the picture that he was a friend of hers, not just an employee. And Skip is just one good example of one of these people who had plenty of stories and insights to share about Olivia, and really had never been asked before, because you kind of have to do the nuts and bolts research to find out who these people are in the first place. And everybody knows who her famous friends, and there's another one, Stephen Sinclair, who was a songwriter that she helped get signed to MCA Records, her label, 1970s, and was really like part of her, I think, as he put, he was part of the OMJ orbit from about 1974, 75 to about 1982, 83, and remained her friend, decades after that. So these are the very people who I really felt like, to me, in some ways, that was the heart of the book, was, or at least a big part of the book, was find people who had, very significant stories to tell about Olivia Newton-John, and personal memories of her both on stage and off stage, and had insights to share, and really had never gotten the opportunity to do that before, and to share their stories, share their insights. And to me, that's, to whatever extent this book has value, I think that's part of that value, is that a lot of people who had stories to tell and really had not been invited to tell those stories before, that I was able to get their stories and incorporate into this book, and now it's on the permanent record, so to speak.
Some really fantastic photos that we are showing here.
And these are all people who sent me this photograph. I mean, of the 25 pictures I think in the book, a couple came from like Wiki Commons, even though some of those were kind of less seen, I think. And I had like one or two like record label advertisements for in there. But for the most part, these pictures you're showing are pictures that were sent to me by people who I interviewed. That photograph, Dean Bryant. Dean first worked with Olivia in 1995. That photo there was taken in 2016. And the last record Olivia Newton-John ever made was a duet with Dolly Parton of Dolly's song Jolene, which Olivia had covered back in the mid-70s, not long after Dolly had recorded it. And the story behind that recording, Olivia's final recording, was really moving because by that point she couldn't travel. It was like fall 2021, and she had less than a year to live, tragically, and couldn't make the trip to Nashville. So Olivia recorded her part in California, and then the producer Dane Bryant flew to Nashville and brought the recording to Dolly and produced Dolly, adding her part to it, and that turned out to be the last record Olivia ever made. So the gentleman that last photograph you showed knew Olivia for 27 years and had some really powerful stories about producing her last record and what it was like being on some of those last tours with her when her health was starting to fail. So, several of those photographs you showed are perfect examples of people who I was able to interview, and that's Olivia's second husband, John Easterling, and that photograph was provided to me by Chong Lim. Chong Lim worked with Olivia for almost as long as Dane Bryant did, for about a quarter of a century, right up to the end. And so that was a photograph taken when Olivia's in Chong Lim's studio in Melbourne, Australia. And so basically that's, all these photographs you're showing are, kind of, I think most of these photographs are photographs that people have never seen. In fact, unfortunately, in a print book, they're black and white, but if you buy the ebook, they're in color. But at any rate, the ones that were in color originally, like the ones you're showing here at least. But that's the fact that most of these photographs are rare. That kind of
So these are color versions of the photos that are in the book.
Yeah, if you get the ebook, there, I'm pretty, all the photos that were you're showing it as being color in the ebook. But basically, these are photographs that hardly anybody's ever seen because I got them from the people who Chong Lim's the gentleman, right. Second Chong from the right, next to John Easterling, Olivia's second husband. So Chong Lim provided me with several photographs, and really, I had even more photographs than I could, publishers only put some photographs in a book, right? But I've got probably dozens and dozens of photographs from people who worked with Olivia from as far back as 1970s to, as you can see, some of these photos towards the very end of her life.
That's another great photo.
Neil Farrow is I think now he's more, I don't think he's currently holding office now. If I'm wrong about that, I'm sorry. But last I know, I'm not sure if he's currently holding office, but he has, and he's very involved in politics of Australia. And again, he himself is an LGBTQ activist, and he's also been involved in efforts to get medical marijuana approved in Australia. And that was something that Olivia herself was later in her life when she was suffering with cancer. She became an advocate of medical marijuana. So all these photographs were taken.
Another great one
in Australia. That's actually, and unfortunately, I don't remember his name to the top of my head, but in the book. But that was that photograph is her with the man who was then the Prime Minister of Australia, the time that was taken. So these photographs, Neil Farrow, are all from visits she made to various state capitals in Australia, advocating for causes she believed in.
See, that's really amazing. It is absolutely just to have these and to, enjoy this. Is that Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister?
Yes,
Parliament House, Canberra, September 13th, 2017, that photo. What a great photo that is. And another one too.
With her daughter, I'm thinking 2001, I believe.
Yeah, this was a credit to Nancy Barr Brandon, and this is a great one too because this one here. Let's see, when was this one taken? I think this one I believe was taken in 2001 at the Los Angeles premiere of the stage musical Mamma Mia with Chloe.
Right, and actually, Nancy Barr Brandon was a celebrity photographer. That's one case where it's not a rare photograph, but it was so good that I wanted to use it anyway. And
it's still a beautiful one that people may not have ever seen, right? And of course, here's another great one.
Leona Boyd was a friend of Olivia's for about the last 30 years of her life, and they even actually recorded a duet together in 2011 called Canadian Summer Dreams. And so there's actually two photos in that book of Leona and Olivia. I think one's from about 1994 or so, and that one's like 20 years later.
Is this the one where she's in Malibu, or is this?
I think this one's actually in Florida. Olivia and her husband Johnny Schilling lived in Jupiter, Florida
At
for a while.
Olivia's home in Jupiter Inlet Colony, Florida, December
Right,
2012.
right.
Wow. Hmm. And looks so happy there and so joyful, right? And
Yeah, they were close friends. Leona was very kind and generous with her time, and has some great stories there in the book.
these are all pretty much exclusive photos you're getting a chance to see
Yeah,
here in
that's
color, folks, which we.
Howard Cohen. Howard Cohen was and is a longtime music journalist for the Miami Herald, and interviewed Olivia many times over the years, usually by telephone, but sometimes in person. And that was actually a charity gala in Miami Beach, raising money for breast cancer research and prostate cancer research. So, cause, and again, Olivia spent a lot of time in her later years. Like last 30 years of her
Yeah.
life doing these very things, doing concerts, charity concerts, and making appearances at charity galas and things like that. Basically, I'm giving of her time and effort and name to raise money and raise awareness for all these causes that she cared so much about.
Mm-hmm. Very beautiful person inside and out, and doing that. Another fantastic photo with a great group of folks joining together here. And this was from Stephen Duros.
He's the gentleman all the way to the right in that photograph, and he was Olivia's lighting director on tour for a couple of years. And so that photograph, and there's another photograph, I think, of just him and her in a restaurant in New York City. But that's what that photo was taken. She often, in fact, a lot of people who I interviewed who toured with her,
Yeah.
it was remarkable how this, whether they toured with her in the 1970s and 80s, or they were touring with her, later, this photograph, I believe, is 2003, but she was touring a lot till about as late as 2017 when her illness made that impossible to really keep doing anymore. But whether they toured with her in the 1970s or the 2000 teens, they said the same kind of things, that being on tour with her was like a family atmosphere, that she really kind of kept her entourage close to her on the road. And so the photograph before last, that was actually her taking her entourage to the Met in New York City. Other times they go wherever, they go to baseball games, or they, sometimes on tour she'd rent out a nightclub just privately for the use of her and her entourage. They'd go in there and have a dinner and dance and things like that. So that was really one of her hallmarks. And several people told me, I toured. And most of these musicians, who are like professional session players or accompany us on tours, a lot of them will play with many different performers over the course of their career. And so some of that was the case a lot for musicians. You've got top flight musicians. They're kind of moving around from tour to tour. And a lot of them said things to me like, all the experience they had touring with all these big name musicians, their experience they had was ever as good as my experience with Olivia Newton-John, because she was just so, warm and treated everybody like family, and was, generous, giving people like $500 bonus checks at the end of a tour, back in like 1982. And that was a lot of money. Giving Rolexes to some of the most, like backup singers and band members and whatnot. So on all levels, the people who toured with her, they felt like it wasn't just a job. It was almost like, to the point where they were kind of sad. They were sad when the tours would end, because it was like they realized that they were unlikely to have another experience working with somebody that was as good as touring with Olivia Newton-John.
Incredible. It really is. When you look at her extraordinary legacy and her body of work, it really is tough to top on many different levels too. What's great about your biography, which again is literally hot off the presses, everybody, A Little More Love, The Life and Legacy of Olivia Newton-John. It is presented as one of the most comprehensive modern studies of Olivia Newton-John's career, as has been said. And I think that's fantastic. It is beautiful. What surprised you most during your research into Olivia's life off stage?
I think really her strength, her resilience in the face of hardships that were pretty tough. Would have been pretty tough most people to take, and I think they were tough in her too. But she really had this. She was a very strong personality. I start the book off by quoting a friend of hers, an Australian journalist named Neil Farrow, and he says that, yes, she really was this, nice person you thought that you would have thought from, your public view of her, but there was so much more to her than just being nice. And I think that's what really struck me in doing my research, was that when she did face these challenges in her life, she was very strong and determined, and always had a positive attitude. That she never, a lot of people, even famous people, something bad happens to them and they kind of retreat or sort of wallow in self-pity. Not her. She was always strong, tough, and had an unfailingly positive attitude in the face of challenges. And that even comes across, in terms of her music. I guess one thing I want to say about her music is that, of course, everybody knows the hits, from "If You Love Me, Let Me Know," or even earlier than that, really going back to like "If Not For You" in 1971. From that point all the way through the mid 1980s, about 25 huge classic hits that millions of people still know and love. But her later career, she became more involved in writing songs, and just looking at some of those song titles of her like 1990s through the 21st century songs from that era, titles like "Not Gonna Give Into It" and "Stronger Than Before" and "Grace and Gratitude." And those songs really spoke to the kind of challenges that she was facing in her life, with her health most especially, and how she was determined to face them with, just like one of those songs said, face those challenges with grace and gratitude. And she really meant those songs to be inspirational songs that would comfort people, that would speak to people going through the same kind of challenges in their own life. And so I think, to me, I hope that maybe some people who read this book who don't know her later music, as well as the music from her classic hit period from that 1971 to 85. And I'm sure there are many people out there who do know those later songs. But overall, again, people think of "If You Love Me, Let Me Know," and "I Honestly Love You," and "You're the One I Want," and "Magic," and "Physical." And really, her later songs that she had more to do with writing, those are really kind of songs that gave you a glimpse into the kind of person she was.
Exactly right. And they took a different turn, and they were very beautiful and heartfelt and soulful. Like you said, of course, selling millions of copies of the pop style songs that everybody knows from Physical, and of course that video that came out just really popped things even more for her. However, she was much more than just these things that we see here on our screen. But again, known for Xanadu, the film, which was very, very popular and well received. The song "Magic," of course, you can even hear her in your head singing these songs. And of course, the time on Grease with John Travolta was another epic time in her life as well. Interesting story that you sort of touch upon too. The struggle between the country music world and the pop world, and the record companies sort of pushing her more in the pop direction, though she also wanted to explore country and folk and other genres of music, not just the pop that a lot of people know her from. And that was something she dealt with throughout as well, right?
Well, it's interesting because when she really first started singing in Australia as a teenager, like circa 1962, at that point, she was really singing a lot of folk songs. But of course, ultimately, that's not what she became known for. Her first actual hit was a cover version of, I think I mentioned it, "If Not For You." That was a song that Bob Dylan wrote, and George Harrison covered it on his triple album, "All Things Must Pass," his one of the first like Beatles solo albums. And then Olivia cuts that in '71. That's her first hit. And even that's kind of a folky kind of song. If Not For You, it was a pop hit for both Olivia and George Harrison, but really was kind of a late '60s style Bob Dylan folk song. And as far as country music, she later said herself, being from Australia and England, people there at that time, 1960s into the 70s, they weren't really thinking so much in terms of like country music, the way that, they didn't have, remember those days in the United States, it was called country and Western. And that, in England, Australia, they'd heard that music, but they didn't really have the same kind of, label for it, realizing that in the United States, it was so distinct from pop music in terms of how it was marketed and what kind of radio stations played it. So to her, she faced real backlash. I mean, it's almost kind of hard to believe now, but in 1970, the backlash she faced, that is kind of hard to believe. But in 1974, she won a Grammy Award for Best Country Female Vocal Performance, and she won the Country Music Association, CMA, the Country Music Association Female Vocalist of the Year Award, also in 1974. And that really spurred a heavy backlash against her from the country music community, which then as now, even more so then, was really based in Nashville. And a lot of established country music entertainers actually formed a rival organization to the Country Music Association called ACE, the Academy of Country Entertainers. And basically they blackballed her from that organization. And so that's when she kind of addressed this and said, I'm paraphrasing her, but basically she said, this is silly, but I record the kind of music that I like, and again, her roots as a singer really started off in kind of a country style folk music, but it really did, her success in the country field engendered so much like jealousy and resentment from the Nashville country music establishment, because she wasn't, think about, especially in that era, it's not as true now, but in that era, most country stars were not only American, but they were from the U.S. South, right? It's almost like this, you had to be from, Tennessee and from, poor, humble roots, like, like Hank Williams or Johnny Cash or somebody. And so really in the long run, she was a pioneer that, and, think of, if you go, look 20, 25 years after that, Shania Hill, she's, I'm tired, right? Shania Twain, Faith Hill, that these entertainers who, of course, in Faith Hill's case, she wasn't this Southern, but nevertheless, it wasn't just that. It was the fact that Olivia's records were also, her country records were also pop. Records like Let Me Be There, If You Love Me, Let Me Know, Please, Mr. Please. They were huge hits, not just in the country charts, but also the pop charts. And that was another reason why the Nashville country music establishment at that time, 1974, were resentful towards Olivia, was that not only was she from England and Australia, not from Tennessee or Mississippi or Alabama, but on top of that, she was making these records that were as much pop as country and were having enormous success in both fields. Well, again, and that's the point I was trying to make a minute ago, that by the late 1990s, that was the norm. Shania Twain was just as big in the pop world as she was in the country world. So was Faith Hill. Shania Twain was from Canada, not from Nashville or Georgia, something like that. So Olivia kind of had to suffer brickbats, if you will, all this criticism, and almost to the point of almost being shunned for a time in Nashville. But really, she paved the way for these artists two decades later. And think about it now, the line between country and pop, and Taylor Swift is another example, right? Taylor Swift has moved, some of her records more so than others, but overall, Taylor Swift has certainly has been very successful in both country and pop. So Olivia Newton-John, really, I think, was the trailblazer. She kind of took the heat of the resentment that success stirred up, her being a pop artist, not from the South, or even the United States in her case, but she paved the way for other recording artists, female recording artists, to have that kind of crossover success. And nobody questioned it when Shania Twain did it, when Taylor Swift did it. And another point I should make about that, it's in a book, but Olivia did have a couple of allies in that. It wasn't as though the entire country music world in Nashville turned against her. I mean, a lot of them did, but Stella Parton, who I had the pleasure of interviewing, Stella Parton, of course, one of Dolly's sisters, and a country star in her own right in that era. And Stella wrote a song called Ode to Olivia and recorded it and put it out. And it was really like an apology, if you will, on behalf of the country music establishment, to Olivia, and also lists a lot of Olivia's song titles. So it was kind of like a cute tribute song to Olivia as well. And Dolly Parton, shortly after Olivia won those Country Music Association Awards in 1974 and faces all this backlash, Dolly meets Olivia and takes her to dinner. And both Stella and Dolly became, from that point on, 1974, lifelong friends of Olivia. during the pandemic, Stella Parton had a podcast, and Olivia heard about it and reached out to Stella and said, "I want to be your podcast." And I tell a story that's in the book, but it turned out to be this very moving podcast because by this point Olivia was ill, and Stella realized that she probably wasn't going to be around a whole lot longer. And then also that last record that Olivia made, the duet with Dolly Parton of Dolly's song Jolene, Dane Bryant, you showed a picture of him earlier. Dane Bryant, who produced that record, said that after Dolly finished, there he is, after Dolly finished recording her part, Dolly wanted to talk to Olivia, and so they do a FaceTime call and have this really moving conversation in the recording studio, with Dolly also probably knowing that Olivia's not going to be around a whole lot longer. She passed like 10 months later. So both Dolly Parton and Stella Parton really were two of the people who rallied to Olivia's cause during all of that backlash against her for her country success in 1974, and became lifelong friends with her.
Dolly Parton's amazing, isn't she? She just is one of those classy people. We just had a dear friend on again. She's been a couple of times with us. The wonderful Melissa Manchester.
Oh, right.
Melissa Manchester just did a wonderful duet of one of her classic hits, Midnight Blue, with Dolly Parton.
Wow. I didn't
and
know that.
Just really, Dolly is always there for everybody. She's just a treasure, Dolly Parton. She's funny, she's warm, doesn't take herself seriously, and she's giving, and she's super talented, and she's written so much music that have become hits for other singers and performers.
Right.
It's just, she's an American treasure. Olivia Newton-John, really, the world loving her, but having like 3 homes in a way. You figure America embracing her, Australia, born in England, raised in Australia, living in America, and of course everybody else around the world falling in love with Olivia Newton-John, and still missing her to this day, still referencing her, still listening to her music, still looking at movies and things that she did, interviews and whatnot over the years. How were you able to balance Olivia Newton-John's public image in the book with the more vulnerable realities of her life that you uncovered?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think one of the things I learned from researching, and that entailed the other thing from reading interviews, or some cases watching on YouTube or Daily Motion interviews she had done over the decades, and people interviewed, that really she faced a lot of setbacks that could have derailed somebody who wasn't as strong. Even the whole controversy involving her country music success in 1974, the Country Grammy and the 4 awards from the Country Music Association. She never got bitter about that. She didn't come out and make any kind of hostile state. Of course, there was no social media, so she couldn't be like, but she wouldn't have. If Twitter had existed, or X, or they call it now, if that had been around 1974, you would not have seen her making any angry or defensive statements. That wasn't who she was. When she addressed it, she basically just said, I wasn't aware that there was such a dichotomy in how country and pop are labeled, and I sing what I want to sing. And she didn't, she didn't get bitter about anybody criticizing. Some pretty major figures in Nashville did say a lot of snide things about her, including some even like established country music journalists in Nashville. She never fired back. She was gracious. And in fact, 2 years later, she came to Nashville. The first album she recorded in the United States was called "Don't Stop Believing," which she later used as the title of her own memoir. But that first album she recorded in the United States, she always recorded in London. In fact, the Beatles' Abbey Road, all those early records, like "If Not For You," "If You Love Me, Let Me Know," "I Honestly Love You," they were all done at Abbey Road. So the first time she recorded in America in 1976, she came to Nashville. So that kind of shows you the same city where I think a lot of people who weren't as gracious as her and as well grounded as her, they would have said, I'm not going to set foot in Nashville. They all said, I'm not all of them, but a lot of them. And again, Dolly and Stella were 2 exceptions, but plenty of major figures in Nashville were criticizing her and saying some pretty nasty things about her, or not nasty personally, but just jealous things basically. And instead of saying, that's it, I'm never going to Nashville, I'm going to set foot in Nashville again, instead she records an album there 2 years later. Another problem she had to deal with was she had, and I was surprised at how much I ended up praying about this, like how much I found out about. but yeah, she had a whole string of obsessed fans who were, in some cases, trying to find her at her house. And two of these obsessed fans were actually like murderers and had murdered people in her family. And I've got these stories about people showing up in the book, but people showing up at her, trying to show up at her house, or one case, a guy like walking into her kitchen because the door was locked, and her having to worry about people showing up at her shows. And she never let that stop her either. I mean, she had security officers. Eventually she hired Gavin DeBecker, who's kind of known as the security specialist of stars. But, even with all these kind of, unwanted, for lack of a better word, kind of like stalker fans always bothering her, she just, forged on, kept going on with her career and going on with her life. She didn't retreat from that either. She was really a remarkably strong person, I think.
Were there any misconceptions about Olivia that you think needed to be corrected? Of course, she was always perceived as warm and loving and a fresh face and wholesome. And she was those things, but she was also human too, right?
And you're not the first person who's kind of raised this among the interviews that I've done since this book came out, or the last couple of weeks. And that's kind of, I think, almost human nature to read this book, or just kind of even what the perception of Olivia was even before I wrote this book. The public perception was that, this is something that's like almost too good to be true. Like, and I think that the book might, reinforce that point even more, that here was somebody who's just such a good person, such a kind person, such a giving person. And if anything, I mean, not that I'm saying that celebrities become bad people, but thinking we've all heard stories. We all think of, granted, a lot of what you hear about celebrities is overblown, but still, I think, there are plenty of celebrities who've kind of engaged publicly in behavior where you think, well, boy, his success has gone to his head, or success has ruined her, and now they're insufferable. Olivia, if anything, the fact that she remains so grounded through her great success is even like more testimony to the kind of person that she was. So really, I can't dispel this notion, and not that I want to, unless I found like strong evidence. But I did not find any evidence that that her public persona was not genuine. It was genuine. In fact, one of the first people I interviewed, a man named Dennis Tufano, who was the lead singer of Buckingham's back in the mid-late 60s. And he toured Olivia and sang Olivia on stage in 1982, the physical tour. And he said to me something like, well, no matter how many people you talk to, I'll almost guarantee you're not going to find anybody who's going to have a bad word to say about her. And that turned out to be true. I must have interviewed 60 people, and all of them said, a lot of this is in the book, but a lot of them said things like, she was the kindest superstar I ever met, and she was the best person I ever, of all the superstars I worked with, she was the kindest and the best person to work for. I'm really, there's no there. I mean, like anybody else, she had some regrets in life. And one thing I write about in the book is that when she was first diagnosed with cancer for the first time, breast cancer, in 1992, she and her husband, her first husband, Matt Latanzi, the father of her daughter, they made the decision not to tell their daughter, Chloe, that she had cancer, because Chloe's own best friend had died of a form of cancer just 1 year before, at the age of 5. And so Olivia and her husband thought, well, we don't want to terrify or traumatize her by letting her know that her mother has cancer. And the way their daughter ends up finding out is one day she's at school, and children tell her, your mother has cancer. And she comes home, demanding to know if it's true, and very upset. And so Olivia later said repeatedly that she regretted how she handled that she'd wish that she had been forthright and honest and told her daughter that she had cancer instead of trying to hide it from her. And I think some of her relationships prior to, by all accounts, her second marriage to John Easterling, which lasted till death did them part, that was the one that was like a perfect match, a great marriage. But she had some pretty rough relationships that ended badly before that. But again, I never came across anything that suggested that, if anything, it was usually kind of, not that it's my job to assign blame, but I never heard any salacious stories put that way. She was never, she wasn't the one doing things that would, break up those relationships. It was more,
Right.
so really there was no, I mean, I wasn't trying to write like hagiography, if that's the word. If I'd found something that was, damning, I would have felt compelled to, look what I found. She wasn't what we thought. But if anything, it was just the opposite. I mean, it was all those good things that came across in her public image were true, and she did so much more that probably not enough people are really aware of, because she did a lot of them after the spotlight was not as brightly upon her as it was during the Greece era, the physical era.
Exactly right, which was a whole other area, and people did really gravitate to it. In Greece, of course, with John Travolta, which is still a classic. You got to see different sides of her that perhaps you didn't necessarily see earlier, right?
And it's interesting because really, one of the things, I guess I knew this, but I just hadn't, as a pop music fan, somebody been a fan of hers, but I didn't really give it a lot of thought until I started, actually researching, writing the book. She actually reinvented herself a couple of times very effectively. I mean, she really had almost like three distinct periods in that. If her heyday was like 1971 to 85, then she had three distinct periods within that heyday. First was that, pop country, almost folkish period from like If Not For You in 71 through like Please Mr. Please 1975. And then actually her success started like dwindling in 1976, 77, where she wasn't, her records were like hitting the top 30, but not the top 10 or top 5 anymore. And for a year or two, it looked like maybe her run on top was going to be over. And then she gets the offer for Greece in 1977 that comes out in 78. And the way that she herself put it, I used this as a chapter title in the book, was Sandy number one, Sandy number two. And Sandy number one was the girl next door, Olivia, singing Hopelessly Devoted to You, which is very much the kind of song that she could have recorded 3 or 4 years earlier. And then Sandy number two is when she comes out in the black leather, and she and Travolta are singing You're the One That I Want. And that really reinvented her career. That that kind of put to bed although she always did kind of have that, to some extent, still had that like wholesome, nice girl next door image, but there was nothing mousy about Sandy number two, right? The tell me about it, stud line, and the whole putting out the cigarette button, and launching shoving John Travolta back and launching into You're the One That I Want. And that really did, her very next album after that was called Totally Hot. That's where A Little More Love, that song was like the first single off Totally Hot, the first post-Grease album. She's wearing black leather on the cover of that too. And then 1981, that's the year MTV comes along, and Physical, and it's a funny story about Physical too, because that was a song that her manager had suggested to her, and a good friend of hers, Steve Kipner, who she had known in Australia, he was one of the 2 writers of that song. So she records a song, her manager and wants her cut, and one of her best friends wrote it. So she records it, and then she starts having second thoughts. And it shows you how much times have changed, because her second thoughts in 1981 were, oh no, the lyrics of this song are too sexually suggestive. They're too risque. And, listen to the lyrics of Physical. There's nothing, I think the most risque line in the whole song is, there's nothing left to talk about unless it's horizontally, right? And so, compare things even being heard 20, 10, 20, certainly things we've heard in the 21st century.
Right.
Physical does not sound risque or sexually explicit in any way, shape, or form. But to her in 1981, that became her concern. What are my fans going to think? What's the public going to think? And actually, there were some radio stations in Utah that did ban the single, but that ended up, if anything, kind of further fueling, the publicity that generated, if anything, kind of further helped it. But the way that she, I think it was very clever. And again, it shows you that, she wasn't just the puppet of managers or producers. Now, her main record producer, John Farah, was also one of her main songwriters. And John Farah and his wife, Pat, were friends of hers going back to the 1960s in Australia. But so she did have songwriters, and John Farah was influential as a producer, but she wasn't just a puppet in the hands of her producer of the record company. And this is a good example. When she starts to worry that Physical was, oh no, it's too risque, it's going to alienate people perhaps. So she comes up with the idea of making that video, which really makes it seem like the song is more about exercise. And you can tell it's a very spoof-like video, but the point is that was purposely her way of like taking the edge off of what she thought at that time was the edge of these supposedly risque lyrics by making a workout video. And she has the spandex look in the video. And I think really the two women who did the most to kick off that 1980s fitness craze were Olivia Newton-John with the physical video and her looking at video, and Jane Fonda and those VHS exercise tapes she was doing around at the same time. So Olivia kind of just in time for MTV. MTV came out 2 months before the physical video did. So just in time for the way MTV revolutionized the 1980s music industry. A lot of the stars of the 70s were kind of like pushed aside once MTV came along, and that could have been Olivia's fate. But that physical video, totally her idea to just as she sought to take the focus off of the supposedly explicit lyrics of physical and make it seem like an exercise song instead. But that video became so iconic, and that really launched like that was kind of the third phase of her heyday. The phase number one was the country pop. Phase number two was Grease. Phase number three was physical.
Incredible, it really is, and of course Xanadu in there as well. And you still hear the music. You still have the opportunity to see some great music came out of that movie as well. Xanadu. She maintained this wonderful beloved friendship with John Travolta all of these years, even past Grease, right?
To the very end. In fact, the last public show she did. Well, she did travel to Australia right before COVID hit. So it was like, I think February of 2020 for a benefit concert because fires, that was summer in Australia, and Australia had been devastated by fires. And so she went down there to do I can't remember, it was a couple of songs. It wasn't a full show because it was many performers. Plus at that point, she wasn't very well, but she did go to Australia shortly before COVID hit to participate in this benefit concert for a couple of numbers. But in December of 2019, she and John Travolta did the last full shows Olivia did. In December 2019, she and John Travolta reunited with some of the cast members and behind the scenes people of Grease for these Grease sing-alongs, which basically was you get this big theater and show Grease, and then in course John, Olivia, and the people come out do an introduction. And then they show Grease, and when the songs come on, run the lyrics on the bottom of the screen, and John and Olivia would lead the audience to sing these songs, and then they do a Q&A afterwards. And in fact, the people involved in that, including Olivia and John, had hoped to do more of those Grease sing-along shows in 2020 and take it on the road. But of course, COVID made that impossible. And then after that, her health she wasn't up doing those kind of things anymore. So really, the last full show she did of any kind were with John Travolta.
You're right, exactly, and all of the memories just flooded back. And you also, revisit Patrick McDermott's disappearance as well, and that was important to touch upon. That did deeply affect that loss, affected her emotionally and spiritually in such a deep way, huh?
Yeah, it was, and obviously it was rough for her. She and Patrick had a relationship for about at least almost a decade at that point. Not quite, but almost a decade. And as a romance, it had been kind of an on and off relationship. And actually at that very time, she later revealed, it was off in terms of them dating. But even then, she said they had not made any kind of final decision to break up either. And at any rate, it was almost a moot point. I mean, they were very close still. And so for her, first of all, just somebody you've been that close to for almost a decade, just suddenly disappearing, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, he had a child who was still a boy, and so that made it even more tragic that not just somebody who'd been so important in her life for almost a decade, but the father of a small child who she knew, and her daughter used to play with Patrick's son. And another sad thing about it was that the media would never stop hounding her about it, and particularly for the next 2 or 3 years, every time she would do an interview, it would come up. Sometimes her PR person would even say beforehand, "Please do not ask Olivia about Patrick McDermott. She has nothing more to say about it, and that's not what she's here to talk about." And sure enough, more often than not, first question, second question, third question in,
would be about Patrick.
And they got to the point finally where she'd start threatening to walk out of interviews. She'd say, I asked you not to talk about that, and finally that started to work. And so eventually, plus this time, but it never really ended. I mean, it would keep popping up.
People would still,
even like a decade later, sometimes still interviews people would ask about. And from her point of view, she ultimately concluded that he was dead. All these stories came up about him supposedly being found in Mexico. And she actually she hired, again, Gavin DeBecker worked for her on and off many years, because Gavin DeBecker was and still is the security specialist for the stars. So she actually consulted him. He sent a team of his investigators into Mexico. She gave him a list of like the places where maybe where Patrick was known to have gone in Mexico. They found nothing. And yet, for even now, I just read something not even a year ago, a story online reporting that he was found supposedly just in 2025, found alive. But all these stories then and now, it's like there's no there. Once you actually start, you see the headline, but then the story doesn't really prove anything.
Mm-hmm.
And she told that Leona Boyd, who showed one of those photographs with Olivia in Florida in 2012, Olivia told Leona Boyd, when they saw another one of these stories about Patrick being supposedly found alive in Mexico, she said to Leona Boyd, I don't believe that. I think he drowned.
Her cancer journey, which when it was quite public, she was able to sort of transform her cancer journey really into a mission to help others, right? Which was beautiful.
Yeah, and this kind of partly gets to the title of the book, A Little More Love. And of course, that was one of her biggest hits. But also, she was a very loving person, what she did for so many people. So that title, A Little More Love, The Life and Legacy of Olivia Newton-John, she actually told her personal assistant in 2012, they're in Australia outside of Melbourne, riding to the opening ceremony for the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Research and Wellness Center. And she looks up and sees the sign, the marquee for it. And I guess it's a sign. Hospitals don't have marquees, but the sign for it. And she says to him, that's going to be my legacy. That's what I'm going to be remembered for, that Cancer Research Center and Wellness Center. And I mean, time will tell. Obviously, her hits, I don't think are, as long as people are still listening to music, I don't think her hits will be forgotten. As long as people are watching films, Grease won't be forgotten.
Yeah. When you hear her music, you feel so good. It actually makes you feel good.
That's what I mean. I mean, she has, I think, she really has like two legacies. If all she'd ever done in her life was her career as an entertainer, that would still be an enormous legacy for anybody, a bigger legacy than 99.something% of the world, I believe. But again, that's what she herself said. She looked at that cancer center and hospital and opened up and said, that's going to be my real legacy. And, I think, for one thing, she's certainly entitled to say what she thought her legacy was going to be. But I don't think that was like any kind of like outlandish statement either. Now, she was modest about her career in many ways, but on the other hand, that Cancer Wellness and Research Center in Australia is now one of the world's leading cancer institutes.
Incredible.
There are people sometimes there are people who go from the United States to there for treatment. And one of the things I talk about in the book, she became like a personal, almost like guardian angel for some. There are people in her band who got cancer, while they were during their years with her, or one of their children would get cancer, and right away she'd have one of her specialists in Australia. That's those two signs are for the ONJ, as they call it in Australia, the ONJ. That a lot of times that's called, people in Australia who interviewed said a lot of times it's referred to as the ONJ, and people in Australia know what you mean by that is the Cancer Research and Wellness Center. But she would actually, if one of her band members would come to her and say, I've got cancer, or my son has cancer, next thing you knew, if they were in America, she'd have one of her specialists in Australia calling them and saying, I can put you in touch with this doctor at Sloan Kettering, New York City, or this doctor MD Anderson in Houston. Or for band members of hers who were in Australia, Australian band members, she'd send them to her hospital outside Melbourne, and for free, no charge to them. So I think that really is that cancer center and her good works environment, I mean, it's hard to really balance what's a more important legacy, because it depends on your point of view. But I think that was part of my title, part of why I titled the book, why I titled it the title I gave it, because she really did have this legacy that went, well, I hate to say beyond just her career, because her career was phenomenal and left an important legacy in and of itself. But all these things she did beyond her career, incredible. You'd be hard pressed to find many people at all who accomplished as much as she did in their career. And it'd be hard to find many people at all who accomplished as much for good causes, philanthropy, humanity, animal rights, the environment as she did.
You are so right, my friend. Absolutely. She was a treasure to us all. She was a gift to us all, gone way too soon, but you've really captured her. And for readers, and everybody alike, the central argument of Matthew's biography really is that Olivia Newton-John was simply not just a nostalgic pop culture figure, but really somebody beautiful, deeply resilient, empathetic, loving, whose humanity became as influential as her fame and the long-lasting legacy that she has as a result of not just the music and the movies and everything else, is the giving back and everything that she left us with, the hours of music and entertainment and the gifts of care for others, which I think is fantastic. What do you hope, Matthew, before we wrap this incredible conversation as we honor and remember Olivia Newton-John? I've always enjoyed her. I've always admired her. And I'm so happy that you did get that book going. And there it is, folks. I have my copy. Make sure you get yours. A Little More Love, The Life and Legacy of Olivia Newton-John. It's one of the most beautifully written books. Check out his Andy Gibb book too, as well. That was spectacular, and we had a great episode on that. What do you hope people are left with when they read this biography?
Well, I hope the big picture that you and I have been discussing, that he was somebody who did, of course, leave behind a great legacy as an entertainer, a performer, an actress, a songwriter. And again, her songwriting, she did posthumously get inducted into the Women's Songwriting Hall of Fame, even though, and that wasn't mostly for her hits, because she didn't write the hits for the most part. She was for these songs she wrote, these more personal songs later. So obviously, I know her careers was going to draw a lot of people to the book, that that's what they know her for. And I did try to go into a lot of detail. I'm like, only fit so much in like 10,000 word book, but I did try to come up with like new stories from people who were involved about the records and the tours. But I think, again, people generally know a lot about her career already. I hope what people come away from the book from is that, wow, here was a performer who, she shouldn't have to do this stuff. She could have just, sat there in Malibu with her money and her career. And she really went through great lengths and great personal sacrifice to stand up for these causes that she cared about. And I think her, just like she said herself, the legacy of that Cancer Research and Wellness Center that she helped establish in Australia, that's going to be helping people, for decades, generations to come. Long after she's gone, she won't be forgotten. But long after she's gone, that Cancer Institute in Australia is still going to be one of the leading ones in the world, helping to fight one of the great plagues upon humanity. And there's other examples you give too. Certainly, the book goes into them of all these good causes that she was so important to. But that cancer center, I think that's I can't think of too many other. I think her friend Elton John, his work for AIDS, that's probably the closest parallel you could draw. But otherwise, I really can't think of too many entertainment superstars who devote that much to trying to combat a major illness like that.
It's wonderful when people do. And what do you think she would feel if Olivia Newton-John was here about the book? I'm sure she would love it herself.
I hope so. I mean, you never know. I hope so. I mean, she was such a private person. The reason she wrote her memoir was because I think it was in about 2017, she found out that in Australia, a 2-part TV movie was being made about her life. And at that point she said, well, I better write my own memoir, because if somebody else is telling my story, then I want to get mine out there too.
That happens a lot, right? Where somebody finds out something else, another book's going to come out, a movie. I better do it myself so it's in my own words or what have you sometimes. But you have really done such a beautiful job, Matthew, in capturing a well-rounded vision of not just, the mega star, the international star, but also the person, the human, Olivia Newton-John, the person on stage, the person off stage, and you've done it in such an extraordinary way. Had you been a fan of hers before you decided to take the deep dive and really put your love, heart, soul, hours, blood, sweat, and tears for the last couple of years into this book? And if you were a fan, did this enhance your respect and appreciation for who Olivia Newton-John was?
Absolutely for part two. I mean, I've been a fan too. I mean, but I wasn't what I'd call a super fan. I mean, that was one of the like enjoyable things about doing this was I listened to like basically everything that's out there she ever records, like all those layer songs I mentioned, like Grace and Gratitude and Stronger Than Before. I'd never heard those. I'd only heard like the heyday hits really. Excuse me. So it really was great for me to like discover a lot of this music of hers that I never knew before. So I was a fan of hers before I started this, but not in the super knowledgeable. I hadn't listened to everything she ever did, and I gained a lot more enjoyment and respect of her complete body of work that I didn't have before. But to your second point, I really did come away thinking, wow, what a life and what a legacy that even those later years when she was she was suffering, she was still autographing album covers and auctioning them to raise money for her cancer center in Australia. And I talk a lot about this in the book. In 2008, she leads a great Wall of China charity walk. That was before the cancer hospital in Australia was built. So she's personally walking and getting up every day and walking along the Great Wall of China. And other people with her like coming and going, but she gets sick during it. And she still keeps marching onward. I mean, right, that was 2008. I mean, she was wealthy. She didn't need to do that. She could have said, I'll sponsor somebody, but she actually gets out there, and walks that Great Wall of China.
Incredible, right?
Rain or regardless of weather, she's sick. She keeps. I mean, so yeah, I don't want to sound like again. I didn't mean to necessarily. I just wanted to write. I didn't have any preconceived notions, but that was what struck me was when I was writing this book was like, wow, what a legacy.
You have a way of writing it, which I think what's fascinating about it is like you come in like you did with the book on Andy Gibb, almost like a little kid, as fascinated by what you're learning about the person. And you have this unique, distinctive way of sharing the story, of telling the story, and allowing us to then form our own feelings and opinions and thoughts of these iconic stars, both of whom, Olivia Newton-John and Andy Gibb, gone way too soon. I remember, when we heard that Olivia Newton-John had passed, everybody was rooting for her. She had the cancer. And then sort of there was a little bit what seemed like a bounce back, which was wonderful. And then we heard the news that she passed, and it was very sad. I know a lot of people felt it around the world and still feel it today. And they raise a glass to her when they hear the music and when they're going to learn so much more about her with the book too, because you really get into a deep dive in such an incredible way. Here is that book again, folks. So perfectly named, A Little More Love. And the author and the man behind it all, Matthew Hild, is here. A return visit. Again, first he tackled the life and legacy of Andy Gibb, another beloved star gone too soon. And
it's funny you mentioned that because
people love that book too.
my Olivia story, if you will, when I was writing the Andy Gibb book, and this would have been probably like spring 2021 at this point. And of course, I was well aware that Olivia and Andy Gibb were. If I've got more stories about Andy Gibb and Barry Gibb in this book,
correlation between the two, right?
The Gibbs were, because the Gibbs and Olivia were England, Australia,
Australia, America,
and so I think I mentioned this in the book that when Olivia died, Barry Gibb said something like, she and I lived practically the same life in terms of their trajectory. And of course, Andy was like, half a generation younger, but was, recorded those two duets with Olivia, was on, I've got a whole chapter on that TV special she did with ABBA and Andy Gibb. And so when I was writing the book on Andy Gibb, I thought, my God, this, if only I could get an interview with Olivia Newton-John. And so I reached out to her PR rep, Michael Caprio. I've talked to a real nice guy. And he said to me, well, Olivia's not doing any press right now. And actually, I think he said something, I'd have to go back and look at the email, but I think he might have said she was on vacation or something. But anyway, he said, Olivia's not really doing press now. But, Andy Gibb was such a good friend of hers. Why don't I ask her if you can just email her a short list of questions, 4 or 5 questions, and she'll get back to you by email. And that's actually what happened. And so, kind of the original quotes I have in that Andy Gibb book from Olivia Newton-John, and I'll say, I couldn't get, I knew it was a short list of questions, but still I worked in, several, nice little nuggets from, like new, fresh comments from Olivia Newton-John, things she never really, commented on before about, what a good friend Andy Gibb was to her, and kind of how, she thought that he was just as talented as brothers, and, what a shame it was and all that. And I got that, from her, and didn't realize till late, like, gee, oh my God, when she sent me that email, May 2021, she was already really sick and suffering. She could have just said, she didn't have to do that for me. As sick as she was, I think, if she read the book, I mean, the comments I quote from her about Andy Gibb were, basically her kind of, almost like paying tribute to Andy Gibb. And so that shows you, as sick as she was, she still thought, well, here's a chance for me to, say a few things about, somebody's writing a book about my friend Andy Gibb. Here's a chance for me to kind of, contribute my thoughts, some of my thoughts to about, what a great guy Andy Gibb was. And so she actually, typed this email answering these questions. And wow. I realized now that was, barely a year before she died. She was already suffering in a lot of pain then. And she
You'll still cherish that forever.
Yeah.
Right?
And that shows you,
put that conversation.
I almost felt guilty after that. I was like,
but put those memos and notes and emails in a lockbox and save that forever, because that's very, very special that she wanted to be a part of that and remembering Andy Gibb. And now here you are remembering, if it was vice versa, Andy, I'm sure, would have been right there for Olivia, remembering. Yeah.
And that's the thing. She had a lot of close friendships. Basically, people who became her friends were friends for the rest. You'll hear all the time.
And her fans too.
About celebrity falling outs where, they're, or even just in real life, not just celebrities,
right.
Your friends when you're younger aren't necessarily your friends till, the day you die. A lot of people have friendships that splinter, just like relationships splinter. As far as I can see, not with her. The friends she had, famous or not. In fact, I talk a bit about this in the book, that towards the end of her life, some of the friends who really hadn't had a whole lot of contact with her, either they reached out to her or she reached out to them, whether by telephone or email. And she had some really nice conversations with some of these people who, she hadn't necessarily had a whole lot of contact with lately with her illness and all, but people she known for 30 years or 50 years, and they had these nice phone conversations or nice email conversations that they were able to have before her passing. So she had a lot of friends who were, Andy Gibb, John Travolta, Cliff Richard, who were, obviously in Andy Gibb's case, he passed away long before. In fact, Karen Carpenter, that's another one of her famous friends who passed away way too soon. I write a lot about this in the book, that, Karen Carpenter seemed to be, something she talked about and remembered dearly until her, until Olivia's final days. So she really, she had a lot of non-famous friends too, but it's just obviously if you're somebody's famous, and these were friends she'd worked with too. A lot of these friends were, but I was struck by like how many really, really close friendships she had among both men and women alike that were, loyal, true, strong friendships till death did they part one way or another.
And the fans too, legions and legions of fans, intense devotion from her fans for the love of Olivia Newton-John around the world is extraordinary. Before we wrap, my friend, again, this has been a wonderful remembrance of Olivia Newton-John. The book itself, where can you find it? It's Bloomsbury is the publisher?
Bloomsbury. And I'm not telling you the truth. I haven't even been to the books. I assume it's in books. It's on
Discovery of
Amazon. I know it's,
Amazon and all the
I
places,
know, I've seen it like
and
#1 in top
Blueberry
music
and
on Amazon. So I know it's on,
yeah.
hopefully it's in bookstores, but if nothing else, it's on Amazon. For that matter, Blueberry's website.
How do you feel she will be remembered?
Well, again, I hope, and certainly it's been interesting. I've done some interviews with Australian, like an Australian TV and Australian journalist, and as beloved as she is in America, in Australia, it's even more so. It's like, or maybe I shouldn't say more beloved. She's awfully beloved in America, but Australians take this really strong national pride in her. She's their Livy, and I think there's some fairness to that. That even though she was born in England and lived most of her life and passed away in the United States, but I think she felt like Australia was her true home more than either one of those other two countries. But I think that worldwide, she'll always be remembered as this really special entertainer, somebody who very versatile in terms of her music. People are never going to forget Grease. Even Xanadu, which was kind of a flop when it was a flop. The movie Xanadu was a flop when it came out. The soundtrack was huge, but the movie was a bomb. And
The movie was, yeah,
Siskel and
right.
Ebert, give the thumbs down and everything like that. But even that's achieved like a cult following now. So her music career, her film career, and that's going to live on. The legacy that's going to live on for a long time. But I hope that people also remember her for all this good that she did. That she shouldn't have to do is. Several people told me this, that she knew how to use her fame. She knew the power her fame gave her, and she knew how to use that for good. She saw where she could most effectively leverage her power, her fame, her influence, and she did it very. As that picture shows right there, she did it very well. She helped an awful lot of people, and not just people, but dolphins. And she co-founded an organization in Australia called One Tree Per Child that's still flourishing now, and encourages children to help children plant one tree before they graduate from school. So in countries all over the world, there have been millions of trees planted from this organization that she helped found. So, again, I'm kind of repeating it, but that's what really, I knew what a great singer she was, how great Grease was. I'd heard about some of this stuff, but just as a casual fan, it wasn't until I got doing this research and talking to people that I realized, wow, here's somebody who really put her blood, sweat, and tears, even when she was in pain, to do these things. I think that's that's a legacy that that's kind of, in some ways, if the book has an argument, maybe that's it. That maybe this stuff was actually the bigger legacy than her. She couldn't have. As one of the people I interviewed said to me, that the music was the springboard for all this. She couldn't have had the power to do this, the influence to do this, without her great career. But she didn't just sit home and maybe make a charity record and sign a few things once in a while. She was actually out there.
She was out there doing it,
exerting effort, even a lot of time and effort, even in illness, to actually make these things. Make that cancer hospital in Australia never would have happened without her, like literally blood, sweat, and tears.
Very inspiring to others too, who are going through things in their life too. Might be watching our show right now, Matthew, in this amazing conversation.
Now listen to those albums. Her albums like Grace and Gratitude, Live On, the very last album, L.I.V., Live On.
Yeah, L.I.V.
She actually
talk about that.
Yeah, and all the different album. She was by that point, she was like in horrible pain. Dane Bryan, who produced her last record with Dolly, he was on a tour. He talks about having to help carry her off the stage and shows. And she was, but that album, part of the reason why that album Live On was so important to her was that very message. The inspiration. I think she really wanted to help people with the work she did, but I think she also wanted to inspire people, encourage people with her music. But you wouldn't get the inspiration from physical or heart attack, but with that later music, she really wanted to inspire and comfort people too.
Even when you hear on the radio or what have you, I Honestly Love You, even just that song, how beautifully she sang that song with such soul and depth and the clarity of her voice and the articulation, the inflection, the tonality, just that melodic nature of her voice. She's one of those people where her physical appearance matched her voice.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
Early in her career, she took I think I've taught this in the book, and I've got a picture of an ad for the single. But her record company really tried to. I guess record companies always do that to some extent. They want to, we all know that, I mean, Elvis Presley was a great performer, but also as a young man, he was, unusually, good looking performer too, right? And so, and that, in a way, it happens to all performers if they're attractive, but still, like one of the MCA Records ads for one of her first records in America, something along the lines of, "She's as pretty as the song she sings," or something like that. And eventually, when she did an interview with Rolling Stone a few years later, she says, I resent that. I don't want to be, I don't want people to think I'm successful because I'm pretty.
Because of the pretty, right?
I want them to, and clearly they did enjoy her music, but that's another,
Right.
like her own record label, like executives MCA, when she's starting off, they're saying, among themselves, are saying, plastic. She's plastic. She's not going to last. We'll get a couple hits out of her. She'll be done.
Wow.
Critics, some of the biggest, rock and pop music critics, 1970s, like Robert Christgau, who was the Village Voice music critic and published those like big books, like ranking every big 70s and 80s album. He gave her album "Have Never Been Mellow" a D+. I mean, so that should, she really did have to face an awful lot of, like, I think both the way she looked. He said that she was as pretty, she was as pretty as she was talented, and vice versa.
Right.
That, in some ways, it helped her.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly.
But I think on the other hand, those critics look awfully silly now. Those critics in the early mid-70s who were B+, or
they were going like this and everything.
Or saying,
Flash in the pan, one hit wonder.
Plastic, and it's all about the way she looks, not the way she.
Definitely.
People aren't listening to her records 50 years later because like you say, you listen to "I Honestly Love You," you listen to "Magic." It's not just, even if you think in your mind maybe you remember what she looked like. That's not why her music's not living on because the way she looked. Her music
because of the way she looked. Exactly. She was a beautiful person inside and out. She had a physical beauty, but she also had an inner beauty, and her voice matched not only the physical beauty but also matched the inner beauty. So if you hear her voice first, and then you see her, and then you learn as much as we've learned today, even more about Olivia, and read this book, you'll have this understanding of this inner beauty, and almost as if the voice that you've enjoyed all these years matches the physical and the inner beauty, which is a full circle human being, which is what she was. She was there. She was responsive. She was great with her fans. Even when she was ill, she was out there doing the best she can to lift and inspire and encourage and let people know what was happening with her. And she really was a fantastic person, and gone too soon. And we're so happy, Matthew Hild, that you took the time to pen this loving book, A Little More Love, the life and legacy of Olivia Newton-John. Lots of great reviews. Everybody's loving it. The Jim Masters Show Celebrity Talk Show series. I, Jim Masters, put my stamp of approval and love on it too. I encourage you to get it. And I don't doubt that he's very busy. He's got a lot going on, but there's going to be, I bet you, another book on another.
We'll see. We'll see.
And he'll be back here with that. Go and check out the Andy Gibb book too, folks. I know many of you wrote to me. Many of you have commented on that episode when Matthew was here, and we remembered Andy Gibb. How breathtaking! And I mean, I heard from super fans of Andy Gibb, comment and write to me, Matthew, saying, I thought I read everything as a super Andy Gibb fan about Andy Gibb. I thought I got it all. And I got a different feel, a different understanding, and a different appreciation and depth about Andy the person, as much as the iconic entertainer. Same is going to happen with the Olivia Newton-John book too. People will say, and I'm sure let you know, and probably let us know too, as they have done so glowingly about Andy Gibb, that they've learned not only things about Olivia Newton-John, but have a different appreciation of her, and maybe learn some things they didn't know about previously. And again, you know, all different generations, all this music, these movies, these stories, they're out there. So the folks who remember when she first came out of the gate and have been following her throughout, they're going to love it. And the people who are learning about her or just knew her from Greece and other things will have a real appreciation for her more. Again, Matthew, congratulations, my friend, on the book. There it is, folks. You got to get it. And how does it feel to be finished with it, too? I mean, it's not easy writing a book, because how do you know when to put the last period on the last word of the last sentence and say, I'm good, I'm done, I can walk from it? Not an easy thing, right?
Now, I could have written a longer book, but basically, I think the publisher and I had agreed like 100,000 words was going to be it. And I was like getting near the end of writing the book, and I said, wait a minute, I'm not done yet. I'm like 99,500 words or something like that. And so
I didn't even count. It's 100,000 words.
It's about 110.
110,000.
Originally agreed on 100,000. And so I was getting near the end, and I thought, well, I'm already running out of words. And so,
yeah,
so 110, because, you know, in books, the economics of book publishing now is like, make it too long, it gets too expensive, and people aren't going to, you know, makes it hard to, you know, the economy we're in right now in terms of people not, you know, having, you know, people can't buy it. I think that book's like $30, maybe a little cheaper, get a discount on Amazon or something. If, you know, if it'd been longer, it would have been 40 or 40. So I had that. So fine, you know, Bloomsbury, the publisher, graciously said, okay, make it like 110,000, but that's it. So I, you know, I mean, I'm happy. You know, maybe less is better. I mean, there's a fine line anyway. I mean, if I'd written another 20 or 30,000, I could have. But you know, at some point, what's the difference between more detail and the actual? I mean, I think the book is already pretty detailed. Yeah, again, you don't want to make the book so detailed people start, you know, their eyes start glazing over. But you know, so you know, I think basically, I told the story I wanted to tell, and if I didn't get quite as many details in there as I would have, I mean, it's not. I'm not sure that's necessarily a big deal.
You can go to, of course, you know, Amazon or places where books are sold as well. And I'm sure it's going to be in bookstores too. Bloomsbury.com, the publisher as well. And I know, you know, at the time of this episode, I know a lot of it is sold out already. I know you have the, you know, the hardcover, and there's the ebook and all, but it's selling fast. So keep checking, folks, because people have been waiting for this. So congratulations on that, my friend. You know, selling out is a beautiful thing. So get yours quick, folks, and add it to your collection. Matthew Hild, thanks once again, my friend, for stopping by and spending all this time with us here. I know you got a busy schedule, a lot going on, but I said last time when you were here, not that long ago, it was during the pandemic, actually, we would keep the porch light on for you, and that you were welcome back on the Jim Master Show anytime, my friend. And we'll keep that light on for you again anytime you want to stop by. Congratulations on the book, and soak it all in. You did good. And come see us again. And I hope you enjoyed the time with me once again, as I have with you, my friend.
Yeah,
Matthew.
I did, Jim. I apologize for showing up a bit worse for the wear. Kind of tired and with a voice that's half gone. But it's between that my day job and all these book talks, it's been a little hectic. But you're a friend of mine, so I'm really glad to do it for you.
The pleasure is all mine. Absolutely. That's right. That's what friends are for. She didn't sing that one. Dionne Warwick did, but still.
Yeah, but that was a charity song. I'm surprised she wasn't on it. Now you mention it.
Right. Exactly. You be well. Thanks for joining us. And again, one more time, congratulations on this fantastic book. Really well done, my friend. We'll see you again real soon, okay?
Thanks, Jim. Thanks a lot.
You take care now. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Matthew Hild joining us here on the show. Here again is the book, friends. It is really good. It's hot off the presses. I mean, just a couple days it's been out. That's really amazing. And we're one of the first to have our copy, and one of the first to have Matthew on our show right away. We wanted to chat with him. We've been following him for a while. And again, he's been a guest on our show. So we knew he was working on this. And when it came out, I said, we got to show it to our faithful viewers around the world. It's a beautiful cover, isn't it? The Life and Legacy of Olivia Newton-John, A Little More Love. And there's still more. You know, we didn't talk about everything. We talked about a lot of the things that people would want to know, and things that people would have questions about. But we left a lot of room there for you to find out some more incredible things about the incomparable Olivia Newton-John. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, drop a comment below. What's your favorite Olivia Newton-John song, memory? What is it about Olivia Newton-John, if you're a super fan, that you love the most? Have you read the book yet? Are you going to go get the book? What do you love about the Jim Masters Show Celebrity Talk Show series? We like to hear feedback as well. Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our viewers and our fans. It really means the world to us. And again, we thank you so very much for, oh, there you are. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. And we thank Matthew. Really, really a terrific conversation. And you got a chance to learn a little bit more about one of the most celebrated people of all time, Olivia Newton-John, right here, talking about her and celebrating her on the Jim Masters Show. Come see us again. Give this episode a thumbs up, like. We would love that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, if you haven't. That's Jim Masters TV. And spread the word. Share this episode on your social media. Let others know that we're here, that these shows are here. You can check out all the archives and all the amazing past episodes with celebrity guests and friends. There are thousands of them. And enjoy all these great episodes and all of these amazing conversations we have, deep dive conversations about amazing people. Jim Masters here, thanking you for your time, folks. And we love you all. Be good to one another. Take care of one another. And don't forget to do the very same for yourself. Thanks for joining us here on the Jim Masters Show, coming to you from New York. We love having you here. Be well, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode. And cheers.